Usually when you find a war novel, it's a war novel about World War II. And when you find a book about World War II, it usually doesn't have supernatural goings on. Well, okay, that's a bit of a lie. There have been more zombie Nazis than you can shake a stick at, but you know what I mean.
Ghost Talker, published by Tortine, was written by Mary Robinette Kowal, whose last big series was the Glamourist History series, about glamour magic in the Regency era. So moving on to mediums in World War I is not such a big jump for her.
Of the two world wars, World War II is the one that gets the most press. And I could go into a 30-page essay about why that is, but long story short, number one, it was more recent, and number two, World War II is what cemented the world powers as they are today, including the US's foreign policy, the diminishment of Europe's global power through decolonization, and the formation of the UN.
On top of that, you have the Nazis, the ultimate villain. Not only are they this regimented theatrical Hugo Boss-wearing army, but they're simultaneously engaged in a massive war and working to exterminate millions of people.
World War II makes for a good movie, or book, or comic, or whatever you want, but World War I gets overlooked a lot. For one thing, it happened at the beginning of the last century, and for another, it's almost always set up as a prequel to World War II.
But what a lot of people don't think about is how much World War I changed warfare. Armies went through massive changes. What they went into the war looking like was much different from what they came out looking like. They were just figuring out how to use all this new technology that they were developing.
And perhaps most importantly, the way people looked at battle changed. Before World War I, battle was glorious and honorable and masculine. But by the end of the war, you have a very cynical people coming out who actually understand the horrors of modern warfare.
And that's why finding a book that takes place during World War I is so exciting. It's a time period that doesn't get as much airtime as it should.
The heroine of Ghost Talkers is Ginger, an American heiress who is working for the British Army. On the surface, it just looks like she's working for their hospitality services, taking care of soldiers who are off duty. But in reality, she works for the Spirit Corps.
The Spirit Corps is a group of mediums who take the reports of soldiers who have died on the front. Instead of disappearing after they die, soldiers are conditioned to appear to the Spirit Corps.
This way, the British Army can get advance notice on any mass offensives that are causing tons and tons of casualties, or even just get information that the soldiers overhear from the Germans as they're dying. The tactical advantage of having ghost soldiers report in is invaluable.
But the Germans have caught on to the fact that the dead are reporting in, and they are desperate to replicate this for themselves, but they've been unable to figure out how the British have conditioned their soldiers to report in. Worse, there's a leak somewhere in the British forces, one that Ginger has to stop before the Germans learn the secret to conditioning.
Ginger is a plucky heroine. As a medium, she can read people's auras and remove her soul from the body in order to communicate with the dead. She can also experience a ghost's memories, which means that she has experienced hundreds of deaths of soldiers on the front.
Ginger is highly involved with the running of the Spirit Corps and deals a lot with the army, even though she's not technically a soldier. She's like a Peggy Carter psychopomp.
Ginger's biggest concern, other than the Spirit Corps, is her fiancé Ben, who is a spy for the British. She worries about him on his missions constantly.
He's a sweet guy, capable and good at his job, and lighthearted. He also worries about Ginger a lot too, and he can also read auras.
Other characters that shine are Marrow, Ben's assistant, who is also a black belt in karate, and Mrs. Richardson, a knitting granny who has to accompany Ginger to the front when she needs a chaperone.
While Ben was the one originally investigating the Spirit Corps, eventually he's unable to continue and Ginger has to pick up where he left off, taking her to the front and turning her into an amateur spy.
Kowal does a decent job of getting across how awful World War I was for the troops, but without going into too much detail.
She gives some time to the trauma of constantly being shelled and trench foot and living in trenches and battle wounds and PTSD, all the big classic parts of a soldier's reality during World War I, but there are so many uniquely awful situations in World War I that if Kowal had gone into more depth with them, the atmosphere would have been less generic and a lot more memorable.
But I would rather her underuse the horrors of war angle than overuse it. Kowal also doesn't forget about race, gender, and class. They play a big part in how people interact with each other and do a great job of cementing her book in the 1910s time period.
But best of all, the supernatural elements of the mediums and ghosts seem natural. Kowal sets up realistic rules for her mediums, and conferring with the dead can be dangerous sometimes. If a medium is exhausted or not anchored properly, they might die, and these consequences make the scenario seem plausible.
And having the army use ghosts to check in and deliver information is a genius idea. Integrating the spirit corps into the army through an inconspicuous civilians women organization not only masks the medium's movements, but it also gives them a legit excuse to be on the base. I would believe it. It sounds like something straight out of a World War I spy handbook.
Most of the book's focus is on Ginger trying to find the leak, and the plot has enough twists and turns to keep you engaged. The story moves at a steady pace, and there's never a point where you're bored or don't care about the stakes.
In fact, you're so keyed into having the Germans lose the war from watching all those American war films that you instinctively root for the characters.
Kowal also does a great job with grief and makes you feel things.
Ghost Talkers is an unusual premise, but well written and highly entertaining. I loved how well it was put together and how clever it was.
You never feel like the supernatural element was there for camp factor. I could honestly believe that mediums worked with the British Army at some point.
Even better, if this book is well received, there will probably be a sequel, says the author on Goodreads. Pick up this book and tell your friends if you want more. As for us, this book is everything we ever wanted since we first heard about it, so definitely check it out.